In 2007, the University of South Florida Bulls went on a 6-0 run that included beating Auburn and West Virginia, ultimately peaking at number 2 in the country. If they could have kept it up, they would have had a great chance to compete for the BCS championship, but we'll never know, as they would lose 3 in a row to finish 9-4. Funnily enough, the win that got them almost to the top of the college football world was against their arch rivals, the University of Central Florida Knights. In a 64-12 ass whooping, the Bulls showed everyone who's boss. And, well, the Knights wouldn't forget that, as 10 years later, their time would come to take the college football world by storm. In 2017, UCF was in a weird spot. 4 years prior, they were top 10 in the nation and had won their conference for 2 straight years before falling off a cliff in 2015, going 0-12 in an absolutely embarrassing year that saw their coach literally walk out the door. In 2016, the team would at least bounce back, going 6-7, and heading into this season, the consensus was that this team was hopefully going to be better, although the thought of a conference championship still seemed far off. They would be tested for sure, as they would have to face Memphis in Week 2, and Georgia Tech and Maryland would also prove to be tough opponents. And of course, there's the war on I-4, which after 2007 has become pretty much a toss-up every year, with the Bulls winning in 2008, then UCF squeaking out a close one in 2013, and shutting out the Bulls in 2014. However, the last 2 years, it was all USF, as they would thump the Knights 44-3 in 2015, and in 2016 they would run away with it to a 48-31 win. That saw some extracurriculars at the end, with USF shoving one more touchdown down their throats. Needless to say, these two teams really don't like each other. And with both expecting to be good this year, that Week 12 matchup has the potential to be very interesting. With their new coach in Scott Frost, he looked to improve the struggling offense, and they would hope to find their guy in sophomore quarterback Mackenzie Milton, whose quick speed and nimble movements led to a solid rookie campaign. Adrian Killens and Jawan Hamilton would provide support on the ground, and receivers Traquan Smith, Dredrick Snelson, and Jordan Atkins would provide the young quarterback with plenty of options. Their defense was a large part of their 2016 turnaround, with Shaquem Griffin recording 11.5 sacks, and nose guard Jemias Pittman rounding into a leadership role. But their secondary was suspect, as they would lose 3 linebackers through graduation. Nonetheless, they looked to get things started in Week 1 against FIU, and immediately Frost and the team would show just how much they've changed, as they would absolutely demolish the Panthers. The offense would put up 587 yards, Mackenzie would throw 4 touchdowns, and the defense would force 4 turnovers in a lopsided 61-17 rout. Needless to say, beating up on somebody is a good confidence booster, and they would need it as they would face Georgia Tech next, who went 9-4 the previous year. At least they'll have home field advantage. Man, this game should be a fun one. Well, gotta love hurricane season. Yeah, there was this thing called Hurricane Irma that happened and kinda tore through the whole state. Of course, Florida is no stranger to hurricanes. Hell, UCF had their practice facility destroyed by Ian last year. And literally as I was typing this script, Milton was bearing down on the state. No, not that Milton, the hurricane. So yeah, gotta love that. But the damage from Irma was extensive, so much so that the game had to be delayed and eventually cancelled. After their first game on August 31st, the Knights would have to wait 22 days for their next game, as that Georgia Tech game would never be made up, and the Memphis game the next week would be pushed back. But on September 23rd, they would finally return to the field to face Maryland. Now, the last time these teams played, it resulted in a double overtime thriller that ultimately saw the Terrapins come out on top, But this year looked to be different, as both teams would start slow. A lone Maryland field goal would be all the scoring in the first, but the Knights would answer with 2 touchdowns in the second to go up 14-3 at the half. Maryland, having already lost their first and second quarterback, were down to their third stringer, and predictably he would get nothing going, as the UCF defense would keep the Terrapins to only 42 rushing yards, and they would get a pick six as well, as the Knights rolled to a 38-10 victory. With 2 wins under their belt, the Knights were already boasting one of the best offenses in the nation, and it was just in time for them to face their good friends from Memphis. The game that had originally been scheduled for the 10th was played on the 30th instead, and with both teams undefeated, it looked to be a premier matchup. However, after another slow start, the Knights would put up 24 unanswered points to go up 30-7 entering the 4th, where once again their opponent would be stifled. They were absolutely overwhelming as they finished with 603 total yards, with the highlight being a 96-yard touchdown run by Adrian Killens, setting a school record.
Nobody is going to stop this guy. Touchdown UCF.
With another statement win, the Knights were beginning to gain recognition, as following that night they would enter the rankings at number 25. How funny is it that both USF and UCF entered the top 25 after beating teams named the Tigers? Their momentum would continue at Cincinnati, as they would score twice in just a minute and a half, kicking off a 37-point first half. Once again, the offense was unstoppable, as they would put up 7 touchdowns in 3 quarters. Thankfully for Cincinnati, Mother Nature would end their suffering early, as the game would be called at the end of the 3rd due to lightning. Not that it mattered anyway, as for the 4th straight game, it wouldn't even be close. I mean, come on, a 28-point difference, 27, 28, fucking 44? These guys have to be onto something. As the number 1 offense in the country, they got to feast once again as they played East Carolina, who had the worst defense in the country. Predictably, it wasn't close, as the Knights would put up 9 touchdowns. 9! Which included a pick six and a punt return. God damn.
And here comes Hughes again. Hughes to the 20. There are no flags this time, and he takes it all the way back.
For 3 straight games now, they've put up over 500 yards on offense. And after 5 games and 5 W's, the UCF Knights look to be unbeatable. But surely they would cool off eventually, right? Just like with USF, there's no way this is sustainable. Well, despite their incredible firepower, they still only sat at number 20. And sure enough, their first real test would come in their next game against Navy. After an opening drive score, both teams wouldn't get anything else for the rest of the first, until Navy would tie it early in the second. However, UCF would respond with a score of their own, and on the next drive, Zach Abey would be picked off. This would usually mark the beginning of the beatdown for the Knights, but they uncharacteristically struggled, as kicker Matthew Wright's field goal would go wide to end the half with only a 1-score lead. Entering the second half, both teams would score a touchdown, and in the 4th, the Knights would only find themselves up by 3. They faced an even more perilous situation, as Milton would be picked off, but the defense would come up huge and force a turnover of their own, which the Knights would cash in for a score as Otis Anderson Jr. would cap off a long drive with his first ever touchdown for UCF, putting the game away as the Knights escaped a surprisingly close game to get to 6-0. Of course, that tough night would only get them up 2 spots. Man, 6-0 and they're only number 18? What kind of bullshit is this? There's only 7 other undefeated teams, and 6 of them are in the top 10. Their only company would, ironically enough, be the Bulls, who sat just ahead of them at number 17 and posted a 7-0 record of their own. However, the next week, the Bulls would lose their first game against Houston. Meanwhile, the Knights got to play the Austin P. Governors? Who the hell is this team? They literally had recently lost 29 games in a row. But they actually sat at 5-3 heading into tonight. In fact, they would have their best performance of any opponent so far, as they put up 352 yards and 33 points. They even had a kickoff return touchdown. Man, good for them.
Foot race to the 30. He's not going to get caught this time. Touchdown.
Anyway, how did UCF do? 73 points. Yeah, sounds about right. 489 yards, 10 touchdowns, and hell, they even had their own kick return touchdown.
He is in the open. See you later. They're not going to catch him.
For 60 minutes, the Knights showed the college football world the true might of their offense. And sure, this is literally an FCS team, but their point still stands. With that, UCF now sits at 7-0, and after USF, TCU, and Penn State all lost, only 4 other undefeated teams remained. And yet they still only improved to number 15. What? The best team in the AAC still isn't good enough to get into the top 10? This is starting to get a little ridiculous. Not that it mattered, as it served to only give the team further motivation to keep climbing, as they traveled to SMU to face the Mustangs. After the offensive explosion against the Governors, this game once again saw the Knights be stifled, as they would only put up 21 points in the first half. They had their chances to tack on more, but a turnover on downs, a fumble, and 2 interceptions bit them hard, especially as one was taken all the way back. However, they were at least able to hang on to the lead at the half, mostly thanks to Gabriel Davis torching the defense on an 80-yard run. Killens would get one of his own later on with a 64-yard run. But SMU was able to keep it close late, as they trailed by only 1 score with about 7 minutes left. It could have been even closer had they not fumbled at the goal line. But on the 34 they would stall out, and as they faced 4th and 10, the pass to Cortland Sutton would fly over his head, and the Knights faithful could breathe a sigh of relief as they escaped to earn another close win. With only 3 games left, the Knights were still only able to gain 1 spot. Was it because one of their games got cancelled? I mean, there's literally nothing they could have done about it. If they were 9-0 now instead of 8-0, would that have been enough to get them into playoff contention? We'll never know, but for the Knights, they just had to keep climbing. When you're this high up, this late in the season, the pressure is unquestionably prevalent. You're so close to perfection. Only 3 games left. There's no time to overthink things. Just keep playing the way you've been doing it so far, and you'll be fine. Right? And so, the UCF Knights continued their push for perfection. Week 11, UConn. The Knights would explode on an opening score drive, en route to putting up 21 in the first quarter, and Smith would break all sorts of ankles to further boost their lead. However, the Huskies would respond in favor, with a big 60-yard pass to set them up to cut the lead to 28-17. Another fumble would result in UConn having a prime opportunity to further take advantage, but the defense would once again hold strong. Despite some hiccups, Anderson would spark the offense with a 65-yard run, And after Milton would score himself, the Knights would jump up to a 42-17 lead. With 9 minutes left, the defense would force a turnover on downs, and the very next play, backup Noah Vedral would wrap it up with a pass to Cam Stewart to seal a 49-24 win. 9-0. Only 3 other teams remained. Alabama at number 1, Miami at number 2, and Wisconsin at number 5. And UCF didn't even go up a single spot, still sitting at number 14. You're not good enough. Keep climbing. Week 12, Temple. The Knights would unexpectedly find themselves trailing early in the second, and once again they would respond with 24 unanswered, jumping out to 31-10. The defense would force 3 turnovers. It wasn't close. This is like the 6th blowout now. The Knights are unbeatable. 10-0. With the absolute dominant football on display for the past couple months, the fact that they're still only number 13 is a crime. I mean, these guys didn't just beat their opponents, they totally whooped them. Sure, you can say they never had to face anyone good. They haven't even played against a ranked opponent yet, which, yeah, is kinda true. But the Knights would get one more chance to prove themselves, as fittingly, they welcomed their hated rivals into the bounce house for the biggest game of the season. On November 24th, 2017, the USF Bulls and the UCF Knights would meet in the culmination of the war on I-4. This would be the first, and so far only time that both teams were ranked, as USF was number 22 at 9-1. These teams would be playing not just for personal pride and hatred of each other, but also for the AAC title. And of course, UCF would have to defend their undefeated record against a team that was so eager to be the ones to ruin it all. It could not have been a bigger setup for this game, and tonight, the Bulls and Knights would put on their greatest show. It took just 3 plays for things to kick off, as Tampa Bay Vipers legend Quinton Flowers would find Tyre McCants for a 47-yard run to put the Bulls in front. However, the Knights would respond with a methodical drive of their own, as a personal foul, a big run by Killens, and swift legs by Milton would tie the game only 2.5 minutes later. After USF would fail to convert a 4th and 1, the Knights would pick it up and run it down for another score. The Bulls would try to respond, as McCants would have a huge gain to get them deep in UCF territory, but they wouldn't get anything else, as their field goal try would go wide. It was the perfect time for UCF to strike, and they did, as penalties would help them out again, with another personal foul going against USF. Ultimately, Killens would run it himself for another score, and after a USF punt, it looked to be just like how every other game went. The Knights had their big outburst to start the game, and the other team simply wasn't able to keep up. However, this would be different, as USF wouldn't back down that easily. They would force a stop of their own, and then McCants would burn the defense with a 55-yard gain, and tack on a personal foul on top of that, and they sat in prime position to get back into it. And despite a holding call pushing them back, Flowers would find Temi Alaka for the score. However, they would miss the extra point, as the deficit remained at 8. The rest of the second half went without much action, as UCF would punt 3 times, but with 5 minutes left, the Bulls would start another long drive, as they slowly marched down the field, getting to the 21 before Flowers would connect with Wilcox to make it a 1-point game. They had an opportunity for more, as Flowers would go deep from the 42, but the pass would be intercepted, as the Knights would enter the half clinging on to their 1-point lead. Of course, this game would be far from easy, as in the second half, the tensions would continue to rise, as both teams would trade scores. Then, as Milton would drop back to try and find Smith, he would be picked off again, as USF would have great field position to try and take the lead, which they would end up doing just 4 plays later, as Flowers would run it himself to put the Bulls up 34-28. All of a sudden, what had been a 21-7 lead for UCF had transformed into a 34-28 deficit, and time was beginning to wind down, as both teams traded punts entering the fourth. The previous 10 weeks, all that work to get here to be undefeated, was all hanging on 15 minutes of football. That would shrink to about 8 as both teams would continue to go nowhere. However, on 3rd and 10 from the 45, Milton would break through with a pass to Snelson to finally answer back, restoring their 1-point lead. USF would again try to push back, converting 2 third downs, but they would be stopped and punted with about 5 minutes left. Getting the ball at the 20, Milton would move the team as they crossed midfield and looked to put the nail in the coffin. A huge 30-yard gain would put them deep in USF territory, and 2 plays later, Anderson would haul it in to put the Knights up 42-34 with just over 2 minutes left. After 58 minutes of intense back and forth action, the Knights are so close to putting it away. They just need to get one more stop, and their perfect record will be preserved.
Flowers has a man! It is caught! Darnell Solomon! Touchdown Bulls!
But with one hurl of the ball, it all shattered, as Flowers would find Solomon deep to answer back immediately. Punch in the 2-pointer, and this game is tied. The Knights can't blow this. They've come so far. Losing now to your rivals on the biggest stage would be the worst possible outcome, and you'd be damn sure they would never let them forget it. The Knights came out on this field to prove themselves to the college football world, and with 1:41 left to go, with all eyes descending upon Orlando, Mike Hughes would field the kickoff and run into Central Florida immortality.
Mike Hughes with a head of steam, and Mike Hughes, the kicker to beat. Do you believe it? Knights take the lead on a Hughes touchdown.
Incredibly, the Knights would hold on and shove it right down the throats of the Bulls, as in one last act of indignity, Richie Grant would punch the ball right out of Wilcox's hands, where Jaquan Burkett would recover it to seal the deal. In a game that many now consider to be one of the best games of the entire season, UCF would pull out the win once again. After 11 weeks of crazy-ass football, the Knights would come out the other side without a scratch. 11-0 they sat, and with Alabama and Miami losing, only Wisconsin remained as the only other undefeated team. Sure, they still sat at number 12, but at this point their legacy was beginning to reach national attention. The Knights, after running all over their opponents, would put up the best offense in the country. They seemed to have literally everything going for them. Even Frost was getting to enjoy the spotlight. Perhaps he was getting too much attention, as now other schools were beginning to take notice of his skills. He had been the quarterback of Nebraska when they won the national championship in '97. And sure enough, They emerged as the prime candidate for Frost to jump ship and coach for. He had expressed desire to return anyway, and as the season progressed, it seemed more and more like a done deal. Now, as the AAC championship loomed, the Knights had to not only worry about protecting their reputation, but also the rumors of their coach leaving that seemed to be only growing louder and louder. But there was no time for that. The Knights still had one more game to attend to, as they would once again face Memphis to decide the American Athletic Conference champion. Not many thought it would come down to this, as most thought USF would be in instead. But as 41,000 people filed into the bounce house on a cool December afternoon, the Knights were once again looking to prove everyone wrong. UCF still had about a 70% chance to win according to ESPN, and as the game began, they showed exactly why, as they would force a fumble and promptly cash it in for a touchdown. Following a field goal, both Memphis and UCF would exchange 2 touchdowns apiece, as a 9-play trek from the Tigers was met with Atkins burning the defense, and a quick drive to open the second from Memphis was responded with Smith once again showing his elite level of play, as the Knights went up by 10. Things were looking good until Snelson would fumble, giving the Tigers the ball at the 31, which they would easily score to cut the deficit to 3. Looking to answer back, the Knights would drive down the field, as a big pass to Snelson would get them to the red zone. They got all the way up to the 11 before a pass intended for Tito Windham would be picked at the 1. Just moments later, quarterback Riley Ferguson would hit Anthony Miller, who would run it all the way down. Moments later, Milton would be picked off again, this time in the end zone, which Memphis would turn into a field goal. In just a matter of minutes, the Knights suffered 3 terrible turnovers, and what could have been a 38-21 lead was instead a 31-24 deficit, as the Knights entered the half trailing for the first time all season. If they wanted to remain unbeaten, they had to return to playing how they have been for the past 12 weeks. And as the second half started, it looked to be so, as they would mount a quick dash down the field to tie the game as Milton would run it in for the score. However, Memphis would retake the lead with a field goal, so the Knights were compelled to strike back once more, which they would as the unstoppable offense continued to be unstoppable, with Smith coming up big again to put them up 38-34. After the defense would force a stop, it would be Michael Kalubiali's turn to get the team going, and Snelson would get his second touchdown of the day to boost the lead to 11. Combine that with Memphis missing a field goal, and UCF making one, and the Knights had a 14-point lead with about 10 minutes left. All they had to do was hold on and they would be AAC champions. But of course it wouldn't be that easy, as just 2 plays later Tony Pollard would get loose and run 66 yards to make it a 1-score game. The Knights, having all the opportunity to run the clock, instead threw 3 incompletions as they punted, only burning 2 minutes. That gave Memphis the ball with 6.5 minutes left, plenty of time to go down the field, which they would as Pollard would again have a big gain, and more small pushes had them creep ever closer to the goal. Facing a 3rd and 3 at the 10, Ferguson would find Miller, and in just 6 minutes of game time, the Knights went from leading by 14 to none as they sat tied. They cannot be blowing it now, not when they've done all this work to get to this point. The incredible run, the dominant offense, the thriller against South Florida, it can't all just go to waste here. When the Knights were on the biggest stage, what would they do? Go 4 and out! Fucking hell, they're joking! 11-0 and it means nothing! Of course, Memphis would go easily down the field. Of course, they would give up another big run. And of course, they would get in field goal range with only seconds left. Sure, they stopped him at the 34, but at this point, it was practically over. 51 yards stood between the Tigers and the AAC title. And all the Knights can do is watch as the kick goes up and flies not even close! They missed!
No good! The other way!
The football gods had blessed the Knights with one last chance, as future Jaguars legend Riley Patterson's kick would sail wide. Sorry, bud, but you're about 5 years too early with that game-winning field goal. And so, the AAC Championship would head into overtime. For those unaware, in college football, the teams take turns going from the 25 to try and score. And as Memphis would win the coin toss, they would go first. UCF had a golden opportunity to stop them, as a holding call pushed them back to 1st and 25. But they would be nicked by pass interference, and Ferguson would connect with Miller to score, forcing the Knights to respond. With the season on the line, Anderson would run it for 9, and Killens would get the first. Then at 2nd and goal, Killens would receive it again to tie the game once more. With UCF going first now in double overtime, they would benefit from a roughing the passer call, and Milton would get them down to the 1, where Anderson would punch it up the gut to make it 62-55. Now all they needed to do was get the stop, and they would be champions. And so the defense took the field, where they held the Tigers to just 3 yards, setting up a 4th and 7. However, Ferguson would find Miller for 17 to get them to the 5. After a negative gain, Memphis found themselves at 2nd and goal from the 9. And with all their hopes and prayers laid upon them, the defense once again stood tall.
Thrown! Intercepted! It's intercepted, and that's your ball game! Trey Neal on the pick!
With that, the University of Central Florida Knights preserved their perfect record at 12-0 and became conference champions for the 5th time in their history. And with Wisconsin losing to Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship, only one undefeated team remained. The Knights were alone at the mountaintop. Everyone else sat beneath them. It's unquestionable, undeniable at this point. The UCF Knights are the best college football team in the country. Now we can finally enjoy it as they earn their rightful place at number 1. Although, knowing the committee, they'll find some reason to rob them of the top spot. However, they should still be a shoo-in for the playoff, right? With the final rankings coming out, it would be kind of ridiculous for them not to make it. Well, Clemson would claim the number 1 spot. Whatever, kind of saw that coming. And Oklahoma was number 2. Okay, maybe they can get number 3? No, that went to Georgia. But come on, surely they got number 4, right? All that work, all that effort to put together a season for the ages, and the polls would cast it all aside, as they would find themselves still at number 12. The greatest season in school history couldn't even get them to the top 10. Frost himself would openly criticize the committee, as he would say the Knights were purposefully ranked low to ensure they had no shot of making the playoffs. Funny how those words came out of his mouth, as the same day the Knights won the championship, he was gone. Scott Frost, the man who coached this team out of the gutter and up to the top of the conference, was heading to Nebraska to return to his alma mater. It served as one last kick in the balls to Knights fans, as it seemed their magical season would simply go to waste.
In your eyes, what would be a successful season for UCF in 2017?
I want undefeated, man. I want to win every game.
But in one final epilogue to this story, the Knights would get one last game to give the college football world one last fuck you. They were invited to the Peach Bowl to play the Auburn Tigers, and Frost was even able to negotiate to coach both Nebraska and UCF during bowl season. The Knights, now with nothing left to gain as they had no hope of competing for the national championship, had only one goal left in mind: to show the committee just how wrong they were. And yet, the first quarter was relatively silent, as Milton would mishandle the snap and fumble the ball, and Auburn would recover to turn it into a field goal. The Knights would be held scoreless, but at least they would get a break, as Auburn's 7-minute drive would go to waste, as Daniel Carlson would miss from 53. Shortly after, Milton would handle it himself as he ran to get his team in range, where Wright would tie the game. Then it was the Knights' turn to force a fumble, as Neal would punch the ball free. They would capitalize as Milton would rush for the game's first touchdown. However, it still wasn't enough to excuse his lackluster play, as he only went 3-17 in the first half, though his 83 rushing yards kinda made up for it. Nonetheless, the Knights entered the second half up 13-6, but it wouldn't remain that way for long, as Auburn would return the kickoff all the way down to the 26, where they would quickly score to tie the game. After the Knights would be forced to punt, Auburn would run it again down the field, and as Kerryon Johnson took the ball, he would give the Tigers a 20-13 lead. However, just like they've done all year, the Knights would punch right back, as Milton would find Atkins for 26, then Smith for 19, and finally Anderson in the end zone to tie the game. And after the defense did their job and held firm, Milton would get his team going quickly, getting all the way up to the 8, where Snelson would leap and haul it in to restore UCF's lead. But it wasn't over yet, as while the Tigers would struggle to move the ball, the Knights would have a great opportunity to extend their lead, as they would get all the way to the 8 before settling for a field goal. That is, until it was blocked. With 7 minutes left, the Tigers still had plenty of time to turn things around, but when the team needed it most, Jaquan Burkett would rise up and put the game on ice.
It's intercepted, and it's going the other way! Burkett! Touchdown!
A 2-score lead with about 6 minutes left should have been the end, but Auburn would manage to put together a quick drive to score a touchdown of their own, and restore the 1-score deficit with just over 4 minutes left. The Knights had another chance to end it, as they would get down to the 21, but Wright's field goal try would sail wide left, and suddenly it looked like UCF was ready to give this game away. The Tigers were getting the ball back at their own 21 with about 2 minutes left. Still plenty of time to go down and tie this game. This is, the third time in a row where things have gotten hairy at the end? And, well, if we've learned anything from the last two, it's to never stop believing in some late-game magic.
Stidham under pressure, throws it, intercepted!
They had done it. The Knights were perfect. 13-0, a mark that will go down in history forever. Sure, it didn't matter that the polls would only put them at number 6, or that they wouldn't even make the playoffs. The Knights had no equal. No one else to compare them with. They were the only undefeated team left, and naturally, the school would protest. On January 8th, 2018, the national championship game was held, as Alabama would defeat Georgia to become the best team in the nation. But if you go to Orlando, Florida, they will claim otherwise, as the Knights would declare themselves as national champions, and the day after the game, Governor Rick Scott would even officially proclaim his support, as they passed a resolution about it. A few days later, the Knights would finally receive their rightful spot, as they were number 1 on the Colley Matrix. It didn't really mean anything, as it's not like the NCAA will just take away Bama's trophy and give it to UCF. But at the very least, it's a symbolic act that the Knights' perfect season would at least not go unrecognized. And so, the Knights could only look to the next season, as Milton, following his Offensive Player of the Year campaign, would enter his junior year with higher hopes. The 2017 team, who featured 9 men on the AAC first team and 7 more on the second team, would also return for more. Though of course some people would have to leave. Mike Hughes, Traquan Smith, Jordan Atkins, and Shaquem Griffin would all go on to be drafted in the NFL, with Hughes being a first rounder. And of course, Frost would be gone, as he would leave for Nebraska. But sure enough, they would run it back, including beating up on their division rivals once more, and crushing USF, as they defeated Memphis once again to win the AAC at 12-0. It came at a cost, however, as Milton would be slammed by 2 tacklers, dislocating his knee. He would need to be rushed to the hospital and required surgery to restore blood flow due to damaged arteries. It would end up being his last game with the Knights, as he would spend the whole of 2019 recovering, and in 2020 he opted to transfer to FSU, where he would at least be able to return to the field. As for UCF, their unbeaten streak of 25 games would come to an end, as they would lose in the Fiesta Bowl to LSU, and finish at number 8. Ever since then, they've remained a good team, though they've never been able to return to the heights of 2017. Maybe now, with the expanded playoff, they'll have a better shot of earning their first actual championship. But even still, there's no denying the impact that 2017 had on this school. People pay attention to UCF because they went undefeated, and that's something that can never be taken away. So sure, they might not have come away with an actual title, but until they do, we can remember the time that they symbolically stood atop the college football world.
Listen, I said before this was a team award. I had an unbelievable team in Orlando. We never had a top 50 recruiting class. We kind of got what was left in Florida, but we had a lot of kids with heart, and we had a lot of coaches that cared about the players and a lot of players that cared about the coaches. We had a 5'11" quarterback, a lineman that couldn't eat, and a linebacker with one hand, and we had a bunch of guys that found a way to get it done. And run the table in the regular season and win conference and find a way to beat a phenomenal Auburn team in a bowl game. I never say I'm proud of them because that makes it seem like it's about me. I say I'm happy for them. I took over a team that was 0-12 and defeated and didn't enjoy football, and 2 years later they're leaving as champions, and I can't tell you how happy I am for them. Thank you.